morning, everyone. Welcome to the Daily Covfefe on Unsafe Space. I'm Carter, and I'm here, as always, with the bad mamma jamma, Keri Smith, in a hat, as usual.
Good morning, Carter. Hi.
Please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, follow. We've got a subscribe star. You can go to unsafespace.com. All the things. Really appreciate your support. Keri, today, you and I are kind of both sick of talking about politics, and there's a lot of little things that we could talk about, but it seems like we're trying to squeeze blood from a rock or something. It's just not.
There are some things that I just don't care about.
Yeah, or I just get tired about, like, okay, great, Trump is a great shit poster for his Greenland memes, but, you know, what else are you going to say about it? So
who cares?
Right. However.
And the Elon, what's her name? Ilhan Omar.
Oh, Ilhan Omar.
Yeah, I don't really care. I don't feel an obligation to have to talk about every little thing that the 24-hour news cycle does, I guess.
Yeah, which is great because we had one of the unpersons or someone from our community ask you to talk about something, and it's kind of a weird topic, but I think it could be an interesting topic. Why don't you introduce what you were asked to talk about?
Yeah, it could be an interesting topic because actually I don't know what I think about this anymore. This is one of those topics I haven't really considered since my beliefs started changing, and I know what the old me would have said because old me would have just gone along with my tribe. But let me see.
You want me to pull up the article that he referenced?
Pull up the article. Yeah, the question is about whether churches should have tax-exempt status or not. And then he sent me this article from a couple years ago about churches costing taxpayers $71 billion a year. I don't know if you want to read part of that or not.
Yeah, I mean, it just says U.S. churches are costing taxpayers $71 billion a year. A 2015 study says that tax-exempt churches in the United States are costing its citizens $71 billion each year in tax breaks. And they go on with some details about, you know, different kind of tax breaks and, hey, if we taxed them, we could get $71 billion. I don't think it's worth going into the details here. They do point out that a lot of these churches, like here, the Mormon Church, for example, spends only 0.7% of its annual income on charity, whereas, you know, American Red Cross claims to spend 92.1% for physical assistance. I don't actually believe a lot of the secular charities, and there's kind of a known issue with a lot of secular charities also. But that's the argument.
So the argument is if they had to pay taxes, if churches had to pay taxes, we would generate $71 billion from them.
Well, so there's a couple problems with this. First of all, the fundamental problem is it's not your money. So it's like we would get our they're not cheating you out of $71 billion. It's not yours. It's the people who have chosen to donate to the church's money. It's not your money. They're not withholding money from you. They are giving money freely, and you're just not getting your cut of it.
Your cut of
you view yourself like part of the mafia, and you need to get a cut of every transaction that happens in the world. So it's not your money to start with. Second of all, this is a great example also, I think, of how static a lot of people view the world of social interaction and economics. They do. It's just dumb math. It's like, well, if we tax them, we would get $71 billion. No, if you taxed them, people would start donating less because they couldn't write it off necessarily, and the churches would be looked at as for profit, and like it would affect activity that happens. You wouldn't get the same. People don't just keep doing the same thing when you change the rules. People would change their behavior. Depending on how you change the taxes, the behavior would change. So the idea that and especially people on the left, but even people on the right do this all the time. They're like, I know, if we taxed billionaires an extra 2%, we would generate blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, you would not. You would not. They would change their behavior. They would move their money. They would not bother to do certain things. Like, they would change their behavior. That's what people do. to avoid you're freaking stealing their lunch money. Like people, they go to a different playground, they hide their money, they do things, people react. So the idea that you just like, and this is just I don't know, this is this attitude that people are just these little automatons and like people just do the thing they do and the government is the system master and we just press some buttons and things happen. Yeah, that's not really how it works. People respond. I mean, look at Americans have a weird culture where we're pretty good about paying taxes generally. Like we kind of feel like if you don't pay taxes, people are like, shame, shame, shame. You like not paying your fair share. And people kind of try and pay. They feel good somehow about paying their taxes. That's not true in much of Europe. You go to Italy and it's like, oh yeah, I cheat as much as I can possibly get away with. That's just the way it is. Like, yes, our taxes are high, but who pays the high taxes? Everyone cheats. And like, that's just accepted. And it's just kind of like, yeah, of course we cheat, right? They probably bribe cops too. Like that's the culture. Americans have this weird rule following culture where we're like, oh, we have to pay our taxes. So, it's just so I don't, at the outset, I don't think that this $71 billion number is correct. But Keri, it brings up a question, which is the broader question, which is, should religious organizations be tax exempt or differently tax exempt than charities? What are your thoughts on that? What would have been your thoughts with the SJW tribe, and what are your thoughts now?
Well, with the SJW tribe, I would have said they shouldn't have been tax exempt, but that was because SJWs, at least I know there are Christian SJWs. I've learned this from our friend Gracie West, Embarrassing Mom on YouTube. She was in a specifically Christian SJW bubble, which blew my mind and it does exist. I've since learned all of this. I was in more of like the hardcore atheist agnostic type of SJW world. And so there is very anti-religious, anti-God. And so I would have said, no, they shouldn't be. And then at some point I probably would have said, yeah, I don't know. It's something I just need to think about more. I don't know, right? Like if you ask me right now, should they be tax exempt? I lean towards yes, they should be, because people are voluntarily giving their money. But
same is true when you buy an iPhone.
Yeah, but on the other hand, people voluntarily give their money to the Red Cross, and the Red Cross pays a certain amount of taxes.
Well, and people voluntarily give their money to Apple in exchange for an iPhone.
Right.
Your employer voluntarily employs you. That gets taxed.
Well, what are the arguments? So let me hear them.
Well, I mean, we should be clear about, I'm starting from the position that of course they should be tax exempt because everyone should be tax exempt.
I was going to say, I know where you're going to come from, which is that everyone should be, you don't believe in taxes. So how are we going to have this conversation?
Everyone should be tax exempt. I mean, we can have the conversation in a context, but it's clear. I have to be honest and clear about where I'm coming from. Everyone should be tax exempt. And just, I don't know that everyone understands this, but the founding fathers were opposed to the idea of progressive taxes in particular. So a progressive tax, you know what a progressive tax is versus like other types of taxes, right? No? Okay. So a sales tax, for example, is not progressive. Everyone pays in California. I think when you add it all up in the area where I am, it's like 8.5%, which is horrible. But you go buy something for $100, you pay 8.5%. You go buy something for $1,000, you pay 8.5%. You go buy something for $1 million, you pay 8.5%. So it's just the same.
Is progressive taxes where we tax people at different rates because of how much money they make?
So progressive taxes would be, but the income tax, for example, is progressive. So if you make, $30,000, you pay one amount. If you make $50,000 a year, you pay different. I don't know the tax brackets, but this is the concept, right? $50,000, you pay a different amount. $80,000 different. $100,000 different. $150,000 different. And that progressive is when that rate goes up with how much you make. So now keep in mind, even a single number tax, like a single percentage tax, rich people are still paying more. They're still paying way more than poor people, because 8.5% of $1 million is much bigger than 8.5% of $100, or whatever the income tax is. If the income tax is 25%, 25% of 10 million is a lot bigger than 25% of 100,000. So they're still paying more, but they're paying progressive taxes are typically viewed as paying proportionally more even, right? The founding fathers were particularly worried about progressive taxes because they viewed this as a means. Imagine this, Keri, this will blow your mind, that they thought this might happen. I don't know what they were smoking, but they thought maybe if there was progressive taxes, they would somehow be used to buy votes and distribute money from wealthy people to poor people through politicians who would use the tax system to get themselves elected. I don't know. I've never seen anything like that, but that was their concern. So yeah, so they were.
I didn't know they had this concern, by the way. This is
Yes,
all
they
new.
did. Yeah. In fact, let me pull up a quote. James Madison said that the spirit of party and faction would prevail if Congress could tax one group of citizens and confer the benefits on another group. Yeah, yes, it would. And he goes on to talk about it, but they were worried about this. Now, incidentally, there was no federal income tax when the country was formed. The first federal income tax, the first progressive, I'm not an expert on tax history, but my understanding is the first progressive tax, first income tax as we think of it, was came about during the Civil War. And I think it might actually be the only tax that was ever also repealed. It was repealed after the Civil War, I think in 1872 or something. And then in like 1894 or something, they tried to do another tax. They tried to implement progressive income tax again. But the Supreme Court struck it down as unconstitutional. And it wasn't until 1913 that we passed an amendment. There was an amendment to the Constitution allowing for progressive income tax. So it's if 100 years is new, it's a new thing, but it's not something that, for much of the boom and growth that we think of as the Industrial Revolution and the great economic growth that happened in the US, it was not fueled by federal government taxing people and doing magical things with it because they're brilliant. It was fueled by people doing stuff with their own money voluntarily and not giving it to the government. So anyway, so we were in this, and even since when the 1913 amendment was passed, there's specifically, even at that time, there was carve-outs for religion and charity, right? And carving out like tax exempt status for churches predates the US even. Like that concept is kind of old. It's an old concept.
Well, and what's the theory behind it? Why it's
well, in US law, the idea is it was related to the freedom of religion in the First Amendment, which is odd because you'd think, well, do you not tax the press because there's freedom of press also? But the idea was, well, religion should somehow, like, the government should kind of stay out of it somehow. It's kind of a weak argument because you could make an argument that tax exempt status for religion but not for other people is supporting religion, which is kind of what this argument with this article that you shared is making. It's like, hey, $71 billion they're getting away with taking from us, quote, right? Or not contributing when they should. You can kind of view that. And there have been court cases challenging this and challenging tax exempt status. And there have been a few examples. There are rules that churches have to follow. They can't, for example, campaign for a particular political candidate. So there are some restrictions that they have to follow in order to maintain tax exempt status. But I have a bigger question, Keri. I have a more philosophical question for you. And that is, can you run a government separate from a set of moral and ethical principles. Can government, so we have this idea of separation of church and state, which isn't constitutional, but it's not like in the Constitution, but it was a Supreme Court precedent that we use and it's a concept in the West. Can you actually have separation of belief systems and state?
Let me think. I think you can.
How?
Well, I mean, the state is not enforcing Christianity, for example.
Certainly
Currently.
certainly that's true. Yeah.
We're not what's the word? We're not like a theocracy.
True.
And can you ask me something more specific? Because I'm not sure.
I believe in the non-aggression principle.
So do I.
Can the state exist under the non-aggression principle?
Probably not, but the state exists. The state doesn't abide by the non-aggression principle.
That's true. That means that the state must presume that the non-aggression principle is not a morally valid rule.
Okay.
So the state has moral premises upon which it is built by virtue of being a state.
Right, but they're separate from, it's not a Christian state
I didn't say could you separate religion from the state, although I could make that argument that a lot of these beliefs should count as religion. But my question is, religion is viewed by many people, and maybe you can correct me if this is not a good description of religion, but religion, I think, is viewed by many people as a source of morality and ethics. This is where, Prager makes his argument. Almost every religion that I can think of, the morals are one of the primary reasons why this religion views themselves as better than that religion or whatever it is, and some metaphysical claims as well. But this is one of the purposes of religion, is to have moral codes.
Right.
And so if we take that and we say, okay, well, but let's broaden the idea of moral codes and say it doesn't have to be just part of religion. Moral codes can be philosophy apart from religion. Like, moral codes don't need to come from religion. Moral codes can be derived in lots of ways. Plenty of religious people who disagree completely about the origin of their morals have derived both similar and different moral rules, and as have atheists. And there are atheists who support communism and believe that, the collective rules and that the state should be the master of individuals. And there are atheists who believe the opposite and both make arguments. I happen to think one set of arguments is bunk, but that's a conversation for another day. The point is, morality is in the arena of philosophy, and the state must be built on some moral assumptions, and those assumptions can't be separated from the state.
Okay. I'm good. I'm cool with that.
So the idea that we should look to the state as an amoral executor of rules, and that morality is not at all, there's no suppositions about beliefs that are associated with the state, that's false. The state does have suppositions about beliefs.
Of course they do. That's why certain things are illegal.
Right. So the question is really like, and I'm saying this as an atheist, should we bother to try and separate the state from a whole bunch of moral rules? If the state is basically, what the state is fundamentally is an agreement that this group of people represented by the state or agents of the state or whatever can initiate force against other people for violations of rules. That's what the state is. It's giving them the power of force. Like, even in self-defense, you agree when you're in a state. It's the idea is, well, you can't go seek retribution, or you can't go seek punishment. If someone robs you, you're not allowed to like chase them back to their house and, you know, barge in guns blazing to take your stuff back. But the cops are allowed to, theoretically, right? They're allowed to arrest him. So the point of the state is force. So if you're going to have a state that uses force, I think you kind of can't separate it from some agreed upon moral code, and that agreed upon moral code can be at odds with certain religions or other belief systems.
Of course.
But when you pretend that it can't be,
well, but see here in America, that sounds so condescending. Here in America, Carter.
Actually, you're in Texas. That's a separate issue.
Yeah, I'm in Texas. I'm in the Republic of Texas. We've already there's this idea in our culture that people believe that their morality is derived from someplace other than religion. Does that make sense? Like when I have conversations sometimes with atheists, not atheists like you, a different breed of atheists. When I have conversations with some people who are
horrible commie atheists.
Maybe, yeah, but they're like, I don't need a religion to tell me that XYZ is immoral, you know, and it's like, yeah, you don't, but you also are living your moral code is like a Christian moral code for the most part. You have some differences, but to pretend like it didn't evolve from that, like it didn't come from that. We try and pretend like we have certain things that are considered to be immoral that are enshrined in law, and a lot of those things are straight from the Christian belief system, which is you should not murder, you should not steal, you know.
Yeah, but those are unique to the Christian belief system, right? I mean, I do agree that Western government, I do agree that Western governments have evolved from a Western culture, which is a Christian culture, and therefore a lot of Christians are ensconced in law. But some of those are universal and transcend Christianity. Like thou shalt not murder.
I agree. It's in almost all religions.
Right.
But the point is, I don't think that people just innately, I don't know, like where does morality come from? This Jonathan Haidt book again is suddenly very relevant.
Right. Well, I mean, we can have a conversation about where morality comes from, but obviously that's a deep discussion and it's philosophical. I guess to bring it back to the tax exempt state thing, my only point about the state here is I think it would behoove us all, and I think this is how the U.S. was kind of founded. We kind of agreed that, hey, there are some moral rules, there are some moral premises that we will agree on. Maybe the deists and these other people kind of disagree about where they came from, and Thomas Aquinas has a different argument than John Locke might, or whatever it is, about where some of these things come from and the nature of them. But we are in general agreement on certain principles. And one of those principles, which was admittedly not enacted consistently and we were hypocritical about as a nation, is individual rights. It was this idea that, like, hey, individuals are sovereign and should have self-ownership, and they are not wards of the state, and you can't just take money from other people. And this is not a democracy is actually a problem, right? This quote is misattributed to Benjamin Franklin, but it's still a good quote, right? Democracy is two wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for dinner, right? They got that. The reason it's misattributed to Ben Franklin is likely because I think he would have loved that quote. They understood the dangers of democracy and talked about it quite extensively. So I think if we are going to forget that there are moral principles underlying our system of government, like individualism as a tenet of, or as a guiding principle of what we're trying to accomplish as a country. And by the way, getting rid of slavery, women's suffrage, these are things that moved us closer to that ideal. of individualism. Those are instances in which someone pointed out, in fact, Frederick Douglass made beautifully eloquent arguments about this when he was arguing against slavery. He was saying, hey, this document, the ideas in the founding documents are great. They're beautiful. They're right and just and moral. You guys just aren't implementing them. Like that's you guys just suck at basically
Yeah.
his argument. Like, you are hypocrites. You are not living up to the ideals that are enshrined in these documents, and you're not living up to the principles behind these documents. He got it, right? And so those moves towards suffrage of women, towards ending slavery, those are all moves towards the acceptance that individualism is the goal, that individual rights matter, that individuals are sovereign. They're not wards of the state. They're not fodder for the state to use. It is for its own ends. And I think in that context, if we kind of all agree on that basic morality, you can have different, you can say, oh, well, we also have religious freedom. People can believe a bunch of different things. But if we've lost that morality, if we've lost and we start viewing the state as just like, well, the state's just this thing detached from any moral rules, and we don't really care about individualism anymore. We don't even agree on the fundamental purpose of the state anymore, right? Then it starts to get really messy when you have a lot of different belief systems, because everyone is then trying to fight for the power of the state. And the only religion that I think we have today in the secular world is basically that we worship democracy.
Well, we worship democracy, we worship the state, we worship money.
Well, I would say worshiping democracy and the state are kind of the same thing, right? We only worship the state if it's democratically elected. Like, we have this view that, 51% of the people are right by definition, and therefore anything that the agents of those 51% do is moral. Right. Although I imagine if 51% voted against social justice, the social justice warriors would still call them all Nazis and figure out a way to fight them. Yeah. But so it brings us back to what this question about tax exempt status, Keri. Why should this is my fundamental problem with this is, why should a mosque have tax exempt status for pushing their belief? Because they're going to push some beliefs. That's what they're doing. Why don't we have it? We're talking about philosophy and pushing beliefs. We're not advocating for particular political candidates. Can we have tax exempt status? Just because we don't believe in a supernatural being doesn't make us any fundamentally like any different from like a, and I mean, I would argue it may make us different on many levels, but like, just because the purpose of our organization is not worship of a particular supernatural being. And
to be clear, I do believe in God.
I didn't want to put that into your, sorry. Yeah. I just mean the purpose of Unsafe Space, regardless of what we believe, isn't worshiping of God. That's not the purpose of the organization. Right. But we are pretty philosophical. It's a, free speech is one of our most important purposes that we argue for here. And why is that not a church? Why are other charities different than religions? What's special about a religion? I think that's a valid question.
I do too. So your answer is they shouldn't have to pay taxes, but nobody else should either. So then what happens with government? It just goes away.
Well, government existed prior to the income tax.
Okay, but how do their big salaries get paid?
Their big salaries don't get paid. Neither does the war machine, and neither does the welfare state. Government is necessarily much smaller when you don't have income tax. I mean, you can also look at it this way. If government is so worthless that people won't voluntarily contribute some money to have it do some things, What the hell's the point?
That's a good way of looking at it.
I mean, look, if the commies were invading and the government was like, hat in hand, shit, we can't afford missiles, we need to stop the commies from invading, I think a lot of people, myself included, be like, all right, here's some cash. Do you need some help?
I mean,
I don't
yeah,
want the commies to invade. Are you going to fight the commies off? That's okay. Great.
people do pony up when they feel like it's worth. I mean, look at the people who've been donating their own money to build the wall. So like, okay, I guess I'll give money since you guys aren't going to do anything.
Right. So the state as charity would be a fascinating experiment, which would be like, okay, how much value does the government really provide for you? Because if you don't feel like you're getting any value out of it, you're not going to donate anything.
Maybe then it would attract, maybe it would be less attractive for charlatans who want to abuse power to get into politics.
Of course it would be. Of course it would be. I mean, speaking of charlatans, Herbert Hoover and FDR basically, well, FDR in particular, I think, was the architect of using the IRS to attack political enemies, right? So this was, and every president since him, almost every president, I don't have evidence on everyone, but that's become a general thing. Nixon did it. Everyone did it. They used the IRS to attack their political enemies. And there's a quote, actually. Okay, I'm gonna read a section from this Foundation for Economic Education article. So they're talking about after 1913. So after the progressive income tax amendment, it took the politicians less than one generation to hike tax rates and fulfill Field's prophecy. This was a Madison and Field had predicted that what I told you earlier, that progressive tax would be used to buy votes. Herbert Hoover and Franklin Roosevelt, using the excuses of depression and war, permanently enlarged the income tax. Under Hoover, the top rate was hiked from 23 to 63%. Under Roosevelt, the top rate was raised again, first to 79% and later to 90%. In 1941, in fact, Roosevelt proposed a 99.5% marginal tax rate on all incomes over $100,000. Why not? He said when an advisor questioned him. After that proposal failed, Roosevelt issued an executive order to tax all income over $25,000 at the astonishing rate of 100%. Congress repealed the order later. In the 1936 presidential election, Senator Hiram Johnson of California, a Roosevelt supporter, watched in amazement as the president mobilized, quote, the different agencies of government, end quote, to dole out subsidies for votes. Quote, he starts with probably 8 million votes bought, end quote, Johnson calculated. Quote, the other side has to buy them one by one, and they cannot hope to match his money, end quote. In that campaign, Roosevelt defeated the Republican Alf Landon by an electoral vote of 523 to 8.
Wow.
So
my grandfather had a great disdain for Herbert Hoover. I grew up hearing a lot of shit talking about Hoover.
Well, and FDR, right? Senator James Couzens of Michigan, who supported Roosevelt even more vigorously than Johnson had said before Roosevelt took office, quote, give me control of the Bureau of Internal Revenue and I will run the politics of the country.
Wow.
So tax exempt status, should churches have it? I think you could make an argument that religious institutions should not be differently exempted than charity, but you can also make an argument that charity shouldn't be differently exempted than businesses. I don't think if you're going to have a tax, why, Keri, tell me the morals behind this. Why is charity not taxable, but business is taxable?
Yeah, it's a weird loophole because I don't know if you've heard the phrase the nonprofit industrial complex. Have you heard that?
I've seen it in action.
Yeah, I've seen it in action too. I know, especially in the SJW world, I know a lot of people who work for or run their own nonprofits, and they're making a lot of profit and doing very little what you would think of as nonprofit work. But they have this tax exempt status because they're a 501(c).
Oh, as long as you pay, I mean, salaries don't count as profit for a business. So you can pay people and.
Yeah, they make a lot of money on nonprofit.
Mm-hmm. But what's the philosophic reason behind it? What do you think the argument for, hey, we shouldn't tax money, it's being given to a charity? What's the philosophic reason behind that?
Because the philosophical reason, of course, is that the money's going for something good. It's going for the greater good.
Okay. How is that different than when I buy an iPhone?
Because the people don't view that money as going towards the greater good. They view that money as going, no, they don't. They view that money.
What's the greater good?
Helping people.
iPhones help people.
Yeah, but that's not the way. I know what you're playing an exercise with me and you want me to play devil's advocate. I don't disagree with you.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
just trying to explain how people see it, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, well, I guess my point here is it's a fundamentally anti-capitalist assumption, right? It's a poison pill. Just philosophically, it's a poison pill. The idea that giving someone a product in exchange, in voluntary exchange for their money. So when you sell someone, if I sell you this iPhone, by the way, did I ever show you the back of this iPhone?
Oh my goodness, how'd you do that?
It's Legos.
What?
Yeah, my wife got it for me.
That's awesome.
But if I buy this iPhone, let's say it cost me $1,000. Well, I'm giving Apple $1,000 because the iPhone is more valuable to me than my $1,000. That's why I'm paying the money. Otherwise, I wouldn't buy it. I'm saying, oh, an iPhone is more valuable than this $1,000 in my pocket. Here's the $1,000. I'll take the iPhone. Apple's selling me the iPhone because the $1,000 is more valuable to Apple than the iPhone sitting in their warehouse or at their Apple store. That's a win-win transaction where society is benefiting. My life is more efficient and better. I can answer emails wherever I am. I can search the internet wherever I am. It provides value to me because I have an iPhone in my pocket. Apple turns around and takes that money and they can expand and hire more people or whatever it is. Even if it's just they can pay their execs more. You know, dollars, this is the other, there's this is related to so much. Like, even if they just pay their execs more, that money sits in a bank account, which is used as leverage to loan to other businesses. And so, like, that helps the economy. That activity of buying an iPhone has ripple effects everywhere. It's good for society. It's the production of the iPhone that matters more than the consumption, but those two things need to meet, right? If you produce things people don't want, you don't, this is supply and demand. It's economics from high school, right? But why is giving money in exchange for nothing somehow morally superior than giving money in exchange for something that I'm getting back that I think is more valuable than the money I'm giving?
It's because of the way we've been conditioned to think about these two different things.
I have a problem with the underlying assumption that voluntary exchange between individuals is worse than altruism. Altruism is not the standard of morality. Giving money for something and not getting in return doesn't make you a better person. It's not morally superior. Capitalism isn't evil. Voluntarily exchanging is not evil. And this entire categorization of charities as different from businesses is based on a moral flaw. It's based on a moral inversion. It's based on the idea that you somehow need to apologize for doing business, but you get a halo if you're just taking money from people without giving them any value back in return.
By the way, there's been debate about this in psychological community, and I think maybe evolutionary biologists as well, I've talked about this. I may be speaking out of turn, but this is what comes to mind, is this debate of whether altruism itself is even unselfish. It's not unselfish.
Yeah, that gets into some really interesting things, right? Because actually, even in Richard Dawkins' book, The Selfish Gene, there's room for, if you view individuals actually as gene propagation devices, which is basically the model that he views individuals through or using, then you end up with this weird thing where, like, actually this machine sacrificing itself in certain situations may mathematically increase the odds that its genetic material propagate because it jumped on a grenade and protected the platoon or whatever it was, right?
Right.
I mean, that's a weird example, but those kind of things do happen in the animal kingdom where there's an individual in a species will quote sacrifice for something. But so I think there is some evolutionary questions there. But when we talk about individualism and when we talk about morality of individuals being sovereign, that's divorced from whether biologically we have urges to do things or whether altruism can be a good DNA propagation strategy. Good DNA propagation strategies and morality are not the same thing.
Yes.
Right. Raping all of the weaker women is a good propagation strategy for your DNA. It's still immoral. So that's not how we derive morality. I don't know.
Let's wrap this one up. I don't have an answer. Hey, guess what? I don't know what I think about it. And I still don't know. And that's okay. I wish more people, we should all take the opportunity more often to say, like, I don't know what I think about this thing, instead of feeling like you have to have an answer for everything and then speaking opinions that are not your own. So,
I actually don't either. I mean, I know what I think philosophically about it. I don't know if I would want, if we can't get rid of the tax generally, I don't know. It might actually be interesting to have religious organizations and charities all pay taxes the same as business. That might actually have a weird effect on culture in a way that I might like. Maybe all these social justice charities would go away. If you didn't get tax write-offs for donating to them, maybe that would stop.
Maybe Joel Osteen would be affected.
Right. I don't know. But again, my preference is no one pays taxes. So, Keri, thanks for dealing with it. Kind of boring issue for you, maybe. It involved money, which is not your favorite subject.
I don't know why money bores me so much. I really have to try and stay plugged in. Discussion of money, it just kind of like, I go to this cottage in my house. I go to this cottage in my mind. It's like a vacation cottage where I'm just like, and I start thinking about other things. And I'm like, no, wait, come back to what we're talking about.
Is it because you have anxiety over money in your life?
No,
I don't know.
I don't think so. I know, I'm thinking about that. No, I don't think so. I think it's just, I find it boring, which may be why I'm not necessarily good at amassing it, but because I just don't care.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's weird.
Thanks for watching, everyone, even if you're bored by money discussions like Keri. There's a dog.
This is Jack.
If you want to donate to Jack, you can indirectly do so by supporting us at Subscribestar, and Keri might buy some more kibble.
You can be selfishly altruistic by donating at Subscribestar. You guys, thanks for sticking around with another meandering episode. I actually yesterday's was fun. I think people like that image you picked of Susan Sarandon was hilarious.
I was surprised that yesterday's was popular. By the way, just to be clear, we can't even talk about Susan Sarandon. That was demonetized.
Wow.
I don't know what was controversial in there, but...
Well, thank you guys for watching. Thank you for subscribing and sharing the videos with your friends if you like them. If you have subjects you want us to discuss, feel free to send them to us at speak@unsafespace.com. And we are currently reading for book club. If you want to be a part of the next live video book club discussion, it's going to be on September 8th. We're currently reading George Orwell's 1984. So go out and get a copy of that. We're going to put links to the books on our site. And what else? Thank you for, I don't know. Thanks for giving us a reason to do this.